The invisible man in his own empire. Darius Mitchell stood across the street from the flagship luxury store, his creation gleaming under the evening lights of New York City. This store wasn't just a business. It was his brainchild, his labor, and his triumph. From nothing, he had built Mitchell Enterprises into a billion-dollar empire known worldwide for its elegance, quality, and the promise of a superior shopping experience. Tonight, however, Darius was not the embodiment of power or wealth. In his hoodie and worn jeans, he was just another man standing in the shadows, a far cry from the billionaire most would have imagined when they heard his name. This wasn't a typical night for Darius. He wasn't here to oversee sales reports, marketing strategies, or unit expansions into new markets. Tonight, his mission was different, more personal. Stories had trickled up to him from his stores across the country, but none troubled him more than the whisperings from his New York flagship. He had built this empire on the values of equality, inclusivity, and treating every customer like royalty, but rumors suggested that wasn't the case for all patrons. Too many tales of customers turned away, dismissed, or mistreated because they didn't look the part had surfaced. He needed to see for himself if these stories held any truth. His mind drifted to his father, Ethan Mitchell. A man who had built his life with a quiet resilience, Ethan had endured countless silent indignities throughout his years, particularly in spaces like this, high-end luxury stores that made people like him feel small and out of place. Darius had sworn his company would never perpetuate that kind of elitism. It was one thing to build a brand that represented the pinnacle of luxury, but it was another to create a space where only certain people felt welcome. He had promised himself and his father that his brand would be different. Darius crossed the street, the towering structure of the store looming before him. As he approached the grand entrance, he paused to adjust his hood, catching his reflection in the polished glass. A stranger stared back at him, not the suave CEO who graced the cover of Forbes, but just another pedestrian blending into the crowd. It was exactly the look he wanted tonight. Tonight, he was invisible. As he stepped into the store, the smell of fine leather and exclusive cologne enveloped him. Soft jazz played through the speakers, setting the tone for an experience meant to feel as far removed from the chaos of the outside world as possible. Everything about the store was meticulously curated, from the polished marble floors to the carefully arranged designer items that screamed sophistication and wealth. But something was off. There was an iciness beneath the surface, a cold efficiency in the way the employees moved. They were polite but distant, their eyes barely flicking toward those who didn't fit the unspoken mold of the clientele they were accustomed to. "Good evening, sir," came a soft voice from his left. Darius turned to see a young saleswoman, smiling professionally, her demeanor warm but cautious. "Can I help you find something today?" Before he could respond, a man appeared from behind her, exuding an air of authority. He was tall and thin, his face stern and his posture rigid. "Sarah, I'll take care of this one," the man, Mason Turner, said with a tone that brooked no argument. Sarah stepped aside, her eyes betraying a flicker of discomfort before she looked down and disappeared toward the back of the store. Mason's gaze turned to Darius, his lips curling into a slight sneer as he looked him up and down, noting the hoodie and jeans with obvious disdain. "We're closing soon," Mason said coolly. "If you're looking for something specific, I'd suggest you make it quick." Darius felt a rush of anger at the blatant disrespect, but he kept his face neutral. This wasn't the time for an outburst. He wasn't here for a confrontation, at least not yet. "I'm looking for a black trench coat," Darius said, keeping his tone calm. "Something high-end." Mason's eyes flicked over Darius's clothes again, as though the words high-end coming from a man dressed so casually didn't quite compute. He raised an eyebrow. "Our top collection is in the back," he said dismissively. "But it's probably not in your price range." For a brief moment, Darius considered revealing who he was, cutting this man down with the full weight of his power and status. But that wouldn't serve his purpose. No, he needed to see this through, to see just how deep this problem ran. So instead, he simply nodded. "I'll take a look anyway." Mason shrugged, clearly uninterested in whether or not Darius followed. He turned and started walking toward the back of the store, not even bothering to explain the items they passed, suits, shoes, and accessories, all meticulously arranged to reflect the brand's values of luxury and exclusivity. Darius noticed the lack of a sales pitch, the way Mason didn't engage in the usual conversation meant to make customers feel welcome and informed. It was as if he had already decided Darius wasn't worth the effort. When they reached the back, Mason gestured lazily toward a rack of coats. "There you'll find what you're looking for." He made no move to assist further, simply crossing his arms and watching Darius with thinly veiled boredom. Darius took his time running his fingers over the material of one of the coats. It was exactly the kind of quality he had insisted on when building his brand: fine wool, impeccable stitching. But the price tag, left conspicuously turned outward, felt like a deliberate message. He glanced at Mason, who hadn't moved, still watching him with that same narrow-eyed look of disdain. "This one looks good," Darius said, pulling the coat off the rack. "I'll take it." Mason's lips twitched into a smirk as though he were amused by the idea. "You sure you don't want to check the price first?" His tone dripped with condescension. "It's a little steep for casual shoppers." Darius gripped the coat tighter. This wasn't just about Mason's attitude. It was about something far bigger. A systemic issue, a pattern of behavior rooted in deep-seated prejudice. His father's face flashed in his mind again, the countless times he had been treated just like this, made to feel like he didn't belong. "No need," Darius replied, keeping his voice calm, though a storm was building inside him. "Ring it up." For a moment, Mason blinked, clearly not expecting that response. He hesitated, then muttered, "All right then," before turning on his heel and walking toward the register. Darius followed, catching the eye of Sarah, the young saleswoman who had greeted him earlier. She offered him a small, uncertain smile, a silent apology for her colleague's behavior. He nodded slightly, appreciating the gesture, however small. At the register, Mason punched in the price without a word, his eyes flicking over to Darius as if waiting for him to back out. But Darius simply handed him his card, watching as the disbelief flickered across Mason's face when the payment went through without issue. "Enjoy your coat," Mason said flatly, handing him the bag. "I will," Darius replied, slipping the coat over his shoulders. He turned toward the door, but paused with his hand on the handle. Without looking back, he added, "I'll be back tomorrow." Mason didn't respond. He didn't need to. The tension between them was thick, unspoken but heavy. Darius stepped out into the cool night air, his heart heavy with disappointment. He hadn't wanted to believe the rumors, but now that he had seen it for himself, there was no denying the truth. This store, his store, was not living up to the values he had built it on. As he walked through the bustling streets, the coat felt heavier with each step, a tangible reminder of the work that lay ahead. Tomorrow he would return, but not as the customer who had been dismissed and disrespected. Tomorrow he would return as the man who owned everything Mason thought he controlled. And this time, there would be no mistaking who Darius Mitchell was. The battle was only beginning. A lesson in humility. Darius Mitchell sat in his office, the morning sun streaming through the floor-to-ceiling windows, casting long shadows across the room. The confrontation with Mason the previous day weighed heavily on his mind, but he knew there was no turning back. This wasn't just about removing a toxic manager. It was about setting a standard for the entire company and proving that respect and integrity were non-negotiable values. His father's memory was the compass that guided him. But there was something else lingering in the background. An unease Darius couldn't shake. The store Mason had managed wasn't the only location where these complaints had arisen. Rumors about other locations about similar treatment towards customers who didn't fit a certain image were beginning to surface. It was becoming clear that Mason Turner was only a symptom of a much larger issue within his empire. The challenge ahead was more daunting than he had initially realized. As he sat back in his leather chair, the phone rang. It was his assistant, Lisa. "Mr. Mitchell, the board members are starting to express concern about yesterday's events. Mason's termination has caused some ripples." Darius sighed. "Of course it has. They'll think it's bad for business. But this isn't just about business. It's about values." "Should I arrange a meeting?" Lisa asked. "No," Darius replied, his voice firm. "Let them come to me if they have questions. Right now, I need to focus on fixing what's broken. I'll deal with the board when the time is right." Lisa paused, sensing that there was more on Darius's mind. "Is there something else?" "There's more to this, Lisa," Darius said, rubbing his temples. "I can feel it. Pull up all the records for every store Mason has ever managed. I want to see everything. Customer complaints, staff reviews, financial reports, anything that can give me a clearer picture." "Understood. I'll have it on your desk by the end of the day." After hanging up, Darius leaned back in his chair, staring at the skyline. New York City was a beast, relentless, unforgiving, but it was also the city where dreams were made. He had built his empire here, brick by brick, dollar by dollar. But now, as he looked out over the sprawling metropolis, he couldn't help but feel like he was losing control of the very thing he had worked so hard to create. Later that afternoon, Lisa walked into his office with a stack of files in her arms. She placed them on his desk and stepped back, her expression concerned. "There's a lot here," she said. "It's more than I expected." Darius nodded, motioning for her to sit. "Tell me." Lisa took a deep breath before beginning. Mason Turner managed 3 different stores over the past 10 years. At each one, there were customer complaints about discrimination, rude staff, and a general air of elitism. But the strange part is that these complaints were never officially filed. They were mentioned in reviews, customer feedback forums, and social media posts, but they never made it into the formal system. "Why?" Darius asked, his brow furrowing. "That's what I can't figure out," Lisa said. "It seems like someone deliberately buried them. Whenever a complaint would come in, it was resolved without a proper investigation. and the customers who complained would often receive nothing more than a generic apology and a coupon, which didn't do much to address the core issue. Darius's jaw clenched. So someone was protecting him. That's what it looks like, Lisa said quietly. And it goes back further than just Mason. I pulled up some records from other stores as well. Similar patterns. Complaints being brushed under the rug. Managers treating certain customers with disrespect. It's like there's a culture within certain locations that sees the brand as a status symbol, catering only to the elite. Darius ran a hand through his hair, feeling the weight of the information settling in. His company, his vision, was being tainted by people who didn't understand what he stood for. They were turning his stores into exclusive clubs, and that was the exact opposite of what he had built his empire on. I need to get to the bottom of this, Darius said, his voice hardening. Who was overseeing these stores? Who let this happen? That's the thing, Lisa said. It's not just one person. The regional managers, the HR department, everyone seems to have played a part in letting this culture develop. And it didn't happen overnight. It's been creeping in slowly over the years. Darius stood up and walked to the window, staring out at the city below. The revelation was like a punch to the gut. His father had faced discrimination his entire life, and Darius had vowed to create a brand where everyone was welcome, where success was measured by hard work and character, not by appearances or privilege. Yet somehow, that very poison had seeped into his own company. I'm going to every store, Darius said finally. I want to see it for myself. No more hiding behind reports and numbers. I need to look these people in the eye and see what's really going on. Lisa looked surprised but nodded. Do you want me to start making arrangements? Yes, Darius said. But keep it quiet. I don't want anyone to know I'm coming. If they know, they'll put on a show. I want to see how they really operate when they think no one's watching. For the next week, Darius embarked on a covert mission, visiting his stores across the country. He would enter the stores dressed in casual clothes just as he had during his encounter with Mason, blending in with the regular customers. What he found was disheartening. In one store in Los Angeles, a wealthy-looking couple received immediate attention, while a young woman in jeans and a hoodie, who later turned out to be an artist from a well-known gallery, was ignored for nearly 20 minutes. In Chicago, a black man who entered the store with his 2 young children was given only a cursory greeting, while a white man in a business suit was offered complimentary champagne. Darius felt his anger grow with each visit. The same patterns repeated, store after store. His brand, which he had envisioned as a beacon of inclusivity and respect, was being warped by the very people he had entrusted to uphold its values. It was as if the image of success they had cultivated had become more important than the principles that success was supposed to represent. But there were glimmers of hope as well. In some stores, he saw employees who truly cared about the customers, who treated everyone with kindness and respect, regardless of their appearance. These employees were the ones who reminded Darius of what his father had taught him, that true success wasn't measured by wealth or status, but by how you treated others. One such employee was a young man named Jamal who worked at a store in Atlanta. When Darius entered the store, dressed in his now familiar hoodie and jeans, Jamal greeted him with a warm smile and asked if he needed help finding anything. There was no condescension, no judgment, just genuine kindness. As Darius browsed the store, Jamal continued to check in, offering suggestions and explaining the details of different products without ever making assumptions about what Darius could or couldn't afford. At the end of the visit, Darius pulled Jamal aside and revealed who he was. The young man's eyes widened in surprise, but he quickly recovered, shaking Darius's hand and thanking him for the opportunity to work for the company. You're exactly what this company needs, Darius said, his voice filled with gratitude. You treat people with respect no matter who they are or what they look like. That's what this brand is supposed to stand for. Jamal smiled a bit shyly. Thank you, Mr. Mitchell. I just believe that everyone deserves to be treated with kindness. That's how my parents raised me. Darius nodded, feeling a renewed sense of purpose. People like Jamal were the future of his company. It was people like him who would help rebuild what had been lost. As Darius flew back to New York, his mind was already racing with plans. There would be changes. Big changes. The toxic culture that had infiltrated his stores would be rooted out, no matter how deep it ran. He would personally oversee the retraining of managers, starting with the ones who had let this elitist mindset take hold. But first, he had a meeting with the board. When Darius returned to his office, the board members were already waiting for him. They had heard about Mason's termination and the rumors of his visits to the stores. Some of them were nervous. Others were outright angry. But Darius was ready for the confrontation. As he entered the boardroom, the tension was palpable. You could see the questions in their eyes, the doubts about his leadership and the direction of the company. Darius took his seat at the head of the table, his expression calm but determined. I know you all have concerns, he began, his voice steady. But let me be clear. This company was built on values of respect, integrity, and inclusivity. Somewhere along the way, we lost sight of those values. We let a culture of elitism and exclusion take root in our stores, and that is unacceptable. One of the board members, an older man named Richard, leaned forward, his brow furrowed. Darius, we understand your concerns, but making such drastic changes could hurt the brand's image. We cater to a luxury market. People expect a certain level of exclusivity. Darius met Richard's gaze, breaking the silence. Darius met Richard's gaze with unwavering resolve. The weight of the past few weeks pressed on him, but it only steeled his determination. We don't sell exclusivity, Richard, Darius began, his voice calm yet forceful. We sell excellence, and there's a world of difference between the two. The tension in the room thickened. Richard's face remained stern, but the other board members exchanged uncertain glances. Darius knew this wasn't going to be easy. Challenging the status quo never was, but he couldn't allow their resistance to derail his mission. Exclusivity for the sake of image is shallow, Darius continued, his tone growing more intense. It's a facade, a smokescreen that hides the rot beneath. What I saw in our stores wasn't excellence. It wasn't even customer service. It was entitlement. A sickness that's spreading through our brand, and if we don't cut it out now, we will lose everything that makes us who we are. Richard leaned back in his chair, crossing his arms. And you think you can fix this with some grand gesture? By firing one manager? We're catering to the wealthiest clientele in the world, Darius. They want to feel special. Darius's eyes darkened. Everyone deserves to feel special, and not because of their bank balance. Do you even hear yourself? We're creating an environment where people are judged before they walk through the door. We're putting people in boxes. That's not what this company stands for. It never was. The room fell silent for a moment as the weight of Darius's words hung in the air. Some of the board members looked uncomfortable, while others seemed genuinely reflective. Darius scanned their faces, searching for allies in this battle for the soul of his company. I didn't build this empire by catering to the elite, Darius pressed on. I built it by creating a product that was so good, so well made that everyone wanted it. The moment we start cherry-picking who we want as our customers based on appearance or status, we stop being innovators and start being gatekeepers. And I won't allow that. A middle-aged woman at the far end of the table, Lauren, who had been quiet throughout the discussion, finally spoke up. She was one of the newer board members and had a reputation for thinking outside the box. I agree with Darius, she said, her voice measured but firm. We've lost sight of what made us great in the first place. I've been in the stores recently, and I've seen exactly what Darius is talking about. The atmosphere isn't about creating a luxury experience anymore. It's about separating the desirables from the undesirables. And that's not sustainable. In the long run, it's going to hurt our reputation. A few heads nodded in agreement. Darius felt a flicker of hope. Richard, however, wasn't done. You're talking about upending a system that's worked for us for years. You want to change everything overnight because of a few bad managers? Darius's patience was wearing thin. He leaned forward, locking eyes with Richard. I've been to the stores, Richard. Have you? The question hit hard, and Richard blinked, momentarily caught off guard. I've seen how customers are treated. I've seen the way some of our employees look down on people who don't fit the profile. And it's not just a few bad apples. It's a culture that's been allowed to grow because no one bothered to stop it. He took a breath, collecting himself before continuing. We can't afford to ignore this any longer. The world is changing. Our customers are changing. If we cling to this outdated, elitist mentality, we'll be left behind. We need to evolve. Not by compromising on quality, but by broadening our definition of success. By embracing diversity, not just in our workforce, but in our customer base. There was a long pause as the board absorbed Darius's words. He could see the wheels turning in their minds, the old guard grappling with a new reality he was laying before them. Finally, another board member, an older woman named Eleanor, who had been with the company since its early days, spoke. Her voice was calm but commanding, carrying the weight of decades of experience. I remember your father, she said softly, her eyes fixed on Darius. He was a man of integrity. He believed in hard work and treating people with respect, no matter who they were or where they came from. He would be proud of what you're trying to do, Darius, and I believe he'd agree that now is the time for change. Darius felt a lump form in his throat at Eleanor's words. His father had been his greatest influence, the reason he had fought so hard to build the company into what it was today. Hearing her invoke his father's memory was a powerful reminder of why this fight was so important. Thank you, Eleanor, he said quietly. Eleanor nodded, then turned to the rest of the board. We have an opportunity here. Yes, it's risky, but the greatest risk is doing nothing. If we allow this toxic culture to continue unchecked, it will destroy everything we've worked for. More board members were nodding now. Richard's grip on the conversation was slipping, and Darius knew he had to press his advantage. We need to be proactive. Darius said, his voice gaining strength again. We need to show the world that we're not just another luxury brand catering to the privileged few. We need to be a brand that stands for something. A brand that represents the best of what people can achieve, regardless of their background or appearance. He paused, letting the gravity of his words settle before delivering the final blow. And that starts with us. We're the leadership. It's our responsibility to set the tone, to lead by example. If we want to see change in our stores, we need to make that change here in this room. The room fell silent again, but this time it was a different kind of silence. It wasn't the tense, combative atmosphere from earlier. It was thoughtful, introspective. The board members were no longer just thinking about profits and losses. They were thinking about the legacy they were leaving behind. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, Richard broke the silence. His tone was less confrontational, more resigned. I don't disagree with your principles, Darius, he said, sighing. But the execution, it's going to be a logistical nightmare. The costs, the retraining, the potential backlash from our high-end clients could all backfire. Darius leaned back in his chair, a small smile playing at the corner of his lips. He had expected this argument. Richard's concerns were valid, but Darius had already thought it through. I'm not saying it'll be easy, he admitted. There will be challenges, but we can't let fear hold us back. We've overcome obstacles before and we'll overcome this one. As for the backlash, I believe we'll gain far more than we'll lose. People are craving authenticity. They want to support brands that align with their values. If we can show the world that we stand for inclusivity, that we believe in treating every customer with respect, we'll build a loyalty that no amount of exclusivity can buy. Richard said nothing, but Darius could see the gears turning in his mind. He was beginning to understand. Slowly, the rest of the board followed suit, nodding in agreement. The tide was turning. All right, Richard finally said, his tone more measured. But if we're going to do this, we need a solid plan. Something that addresses both the immediate issues and the long-term strategy. Darius nodded, agreed. And I've already started working on that. We'll begin with a comprehensive retraining program for all our store managers and employees. We'll also implement a new customer feedback system, one that ensures complaints are properly addressed and resolved. And we'll work with our marketing team to rebrand our image, not as a company that caters to the elite, but as a company that delivers excellence to everyone. He paused, looking around the room at the faces of the people who would help him shape the future of his company. This isn't just about saving face, he said softly. This is about doing what's right. And if we do that, if we stay true to our values, the success will follow. There was a moment of quiet understanding in the room, a shared sense of purpose. The board wasn't just a group of executives anymore. They were a team, united in their commitment to rebuilding the company from the inside out. Darius stood, signaling the end of the meeting. Thank you all for your trust. We have a lot of work ahead of us, but I know we can do this. As the board members filed out of the room, Darius felt a sense of relief wash over him. The battle wasn't over, but the hardest part was behind him. He had won the support of the people who mattered most, and together, they would reshape the future of the company. As he walked back to his office, Darius felt a new energy coursing through him. He thought of Jamal, of the customers who had been mistreated, and of his father, whose values were the foundation of everything he had built. This was for them. For everyone who had ever been overlooked, dismissed, or underestimated. And for the first time in a long while, Darius felt like he was truly honoring his father's legacy. The plan in motion, as Darius sat in his office, staring out the floor-to-ceiling windows at the city below, a quiet determination settled over him. Winning over the board had been a significant victory, but now came the hard part, translating vision into action. He knew that changing the culture of his company would be no small feat. It would require strategy, patience, and most importantly, leadership that could inspire change at every level. His assistant Marie knocked gently and entered the room. She carried a stack of papers under one arm and a tablet in her other hand. Her usual calm demeanor was tinted with curiosity. "Morning, Darius. You seem deep in thought," she said, setting the tablet down on his desk. Darius turned to her, offering a tired but grateful smile. "I am. It's a lot to process. But now that we've cleared the first hurdle with the board, we need to act fast." Marie nodded, sitting in the chair opposite him. "I've been thinking about that. There's a lot of ground to cover. We'll need a detailed timeline for this cultural shift, and retraining employees across all levels is going to be a massive undertaking. What are you thinking in terms of priorities?" Darius leaned back in his chair, the gears in his mind turning. "We start at the top. Our store managers are going to be critical in this transition. They set the tone in their stores, so if we don't get them on board, this whole thing falls apart. They need to understand the philosophy behind what we're doing. It's not just about policies, it's about changing how they see the customers walking through those doors." Marie took notes on her tablet, her fingers flying across the screen. "Agreed. We'll need a strong communications plan to back this up. Transparency is key. The employees need to know why we're doing this, and they need to feel like they're part of the solution, not just following orders from above. Darius nodded, feeling the familiar weight of leadership settle on his shoulders. I want to lead those conversations personally, at least in the beginning. The managers need to hear it directly from me. Why this matters, why we can't continue down the path we've been on. I want them to understand that this isn't just a corporate initiative. It's a course correction for the entire company. Marie raised an eyebrow. You want to do a company-wide address? Exactly. A town hall meeting. I want every store manager in the same room. We'll bring them all to headquarters and start this off face-to-face. We'll talk openly about the incidents that have happened, the reports of discrimination, and how that reflects on us as a brand. And then we'll pivot to what we're going to do about it. Mary paused, her eyes scanning his face. You know there's going to be some pushback. Not everyone's going to be on board with this, especially not right away. Darius sighed, rubbing his temples. I know, but that's why we need to be prepared. If someone isn't willing to adopt this new approach, they won't be part of the company's future. It's harsh, but we can't afford to have anyone sabotaging this from within. Marie was silent for a moment, considering his words. Then she nodded slowly. It makes sense. We'll lose some people along the way, but the ones who stay will be stronger for it. I'm counting on that, Darius said quietly. We're not just trying to save face here. We're rebuilding a culture, and that means every single person on this team needs to be invested in the vision. Marie tapped a few more notes into her tablet before standing up. I'll start organizing the logistics for the town hall. We'll need to fly everyone in, and I'll make sure we have the right people on hand for follow-up sessions. This isn't going to be a one-and-done conversation. Good. Make it happen, Darius said with a determined nod. Marie left the office, and Darius was once again alone with his thoughts. He had always known that running a company like his wasn't just about designing high-end products or managing finances. It was about people, the employees who worked tirelessly to make his vision a reality, and the customers who trusted the brand to deliver quality. But somewhere along the way, the company had lost sight of that. It had become more about prestige and less about the personal connections that had originally made it successful. Darius had always believed that the beauty of luxury wasn't in its exclusivity, but in its ability to create something lasting and meaningful for anyone who appreciated it. A week later, the town hall meeting had arrived. The large conference room at headquarters was packed with store managers from across the country, all flown in for this pivotal moment. The air buzzed with nervous energy as the managers waited for the meeting to begin. Some looked uncertain, others skeptical, but a few carried an air of optimism, hopeful that this meeting might be the start of something better. Darius stood backstage, looking out at the gathering crowd through a small crack in the curtain. He had never been one for public speeches, but this wasn't just about delivering a polished presentation. It was about speaking from the heart. He adjusted his tie and took a deep breath as Marie stepped up beside him. You ready? She asked softly. As ready as I'll ever be, Darius replied with a wry smile. Marie squeezed his shoulder. You got this. Just be honest. Darius nodded and stepped out onto the stage. The room quieted instantly, hundreds of eyes turning toward him. He walked to the center of the stage, gripping the microphone, and took a moment to look out at the faces before him. Thank you all for being here, he began, his voice steady but carrying an edge of emotion. I know many of you have questions about why we're here today, about the changes we're about to make, and what that means for the future of this company. He paused, letting his words sink in. I don't want to sugarcoat it. This company has been heading in the wrong direction for some time now, and that's on me. As the CEO, I have to take responsibility for the culture that's developed, for the way we treated certain customers, and for the toxic behaviors that have gone unchecked in some of our stores. It stops now. The room was completely silent. Darius could feel the weight of their attention, but he pushed forward. When I founded this company, I didn't do it to serve only the wealthy or the elite. I did it because I believed in creating products that were so well made, so thoughtfully designed, that anyone who cared about quality would want to be a part of what we were building. And I lost sight of that. We lost sight of that. A few heads nodded in the audience. Darius felt a flicker of encouragement. We allowed a culture of exclusivity to creep into our stores where people are judged by how they look or what they're wearing before they even have a chance to experience our products. That is not who we are. That is not who we can be. He paused again, scanning the room. This is a turning point. We're going to rebuild our company's culture from the ground up, starting today. That means retraining every single employee to understand that every customer who walks through our doors deserves to be treated with respect and dignity, regardless of their background, their appearance, or their status. We're going to make our stores places where everyone feels welcome, where the quality of our service matches the quality of our products. Darius could feel the energy shifting in the room. The skepticism was still there, but it was beginning to give way to curiosity. And I need you all to be leaders in this change, he continued, his voice stronger now. You set the tone for your teams. You're the ones who interact with our customers every day. If you're not on board with this, it won't work. But if you are, if you believe in what we're doing, we can create something truly remarkable. We can become a brand that stands for more than just luxury. We can become a brand that stands for integrity, for inclusivity, for excellence. He stepped back for a moment, letting the room digest his words. I know this won't be easy, Darius said, his tone softening. Change never is. But I believe in this company and I believe in all of you. We're going to make mistakes along the way and we're going to face challenges. But if we stay committed to this vision, we'll come out stronger on the other side. The room was quiet for a moment, and then a single clap broke the silence. It was Lauren, the same board member who had supported Darius during the meeting. Her applause was soon joined by others, slowly building into a wave of support that filled the room. Darius felt a swell of emotion in his chest. He hadn't fully expected this reaction, but now that it was happening, he felt the full weight of what they were about to undertake. As the applause died down, he raised his hand. Thank you. Let's get to work. The resistance and the roadblocks. Change is never easy, and for Darius, the next phase of his journey was perhaps the most grueling. With the town hall meeting a success and the rollout of the retraining programs in full swing, the battle had just begun. The euphoria of the applause and the support from the managers was short-lived as he soon encountered the harsh realities of deeply ingrained behaviors and attitudes. The resistance didn't come from where Darius expected. Many store employees, those on the front lines, were surprisingly receptive to the new direction. They were excited about the emphasis on inclusivity, and for some, it felt like a breath of fresh air in an environment that had, for too long, been suffocating under the weight of old elitist ideas. No, the real pushback came from higher up the ladder, from the senior managers who had spent years building their careers on the prestige of exclusivity. For them, the idea of making the brand more accessible felt like diluting its essence. They didn't see Darius' vision of inclusivity as a redefinition of luxury. They saw it as a threat. In one of the first high-level meetings following the town hall, this resistance became painfully clear. Seated around a polished oak conference table, Darius faced his team of senior executives, all of them long-time veterans of the company. These were the people who had helped build the brand into what it was today, and they weren't about to let go of their hard-earned reputations without a fight. I've been looking over the retraining protocols, said Philip, the head of international sales, a silver-haired executive with a sharp suit and sharper tongue. And I have to say, Darius, I'm concerned. Some of these changes, they're radical. We've spent decades cultivating a certain image, and now you're asking us to flip that on its head. Darius didn't flinch. He had been expecting this. I understand your concerns, Philip, but our image is part of the problem. The reports we've been getting about customers being turned away, treated poorly because they didn't fit the mold of what we think our clientele should be, those are deeply troubling. We can't afford to alienate people based on outdated perceptions of exclusivity. But that's exactly what luxury is, Darius. Philip shot back, his voice rising. It's about being selective. It's about maintaining an aura of unattainability. If anyone can walk into one of our stores and be treated the same way as someone who's been a loyal, high-spending customer for years, what's to differentiate us from any other brand? Before Darius could respond, Melanie, the head of marketing, chimed in. I have to agree with Philip on this. The brand equity we've built is based on a certain clientele. Our advertisements, our campaigns, they speak to that image of exclusivity. If we open the doors too wide, we risk losing the very thing that sets us apart. Darius felt a knot tighten in his chest. He knew this conversation was coming, but the vehemence in their voices still caught him off guard. He leaned forward, resting his elbows on the table, and looked each of them in the eye. I get it, he said, his voice calm but firm. I understand where you're coming from, but here's the thing. Luxury isn't just about exclusivity anymore. It's about experience. It's about how we make people feel. And right now, we're making a lot of people feel like they don't belong. That's not sustainable. He let his words hang in the air for a moment before continuing. The world is changing. Our customers are changing. The younger generations, millennials, Gen Z, they're not interested in brands that make them feel less than. They want authenticity, inclusivity, transparency. If we don't adapt, we're going to get left behind. There was a long pause as the executives exchanged glances, each waiting for the other to break the silence. Finally, it was Lauren, the same board member who had supported Darius from the beginning, who spoke up. Darius is right, she said quietly but with conviction. The landscape of luxury is shifting. Look at companies like Gucci and Balenciaga, they're evolving. They're finding ways to maintain their high-end appeal while still embracing a broader, more diverse customer base. We need to do the same. Philip crossed his arms, clearly unconvinced. And what about our core customers? The ones who have been loyal to us for years, are we just going to abandon them? Darius shook his head. Absolutely not. We're not turning our backs on anyone. But loyalty isn't about exclusion. It's about trust. It's about making sure that every customer, whether they've been with us for 10 years or 10 minutes, feels valued. That's what we're striving for. Melanie sighed, clearly still skeptical. I don't know, Darius. This feels risky. We're tinkering with something that's worked for a long time. If we get this wrong, Darius interrupted gently, we can always adjust. But if we don't try, we'll never know. And I guarantee you, if we stay on the path we're on, we're heading for a much bigger failure. The reports, the feedback we've been getting, it's not just a minor issue. It's systemic. We have to address it, or we're going to lose customers, lose employees, and ultimately lose relevance. The room was heavy with tension. Darius could see that he had planted seeds of doubt, but he also knew this wasn't the end of the resistance. Changing minds, especially ones that had been set in their ways for years, would take time. In the following weeks, the internal friction intensified. The retraining programs were met with skepticism from some store managers, particularly those in wealthier regions, where the exclusivity of the brand had become part of the store's identity. Some managers resisted implementing the changes, arguing that their clientele didn't want or need inclusivity. They wanted luxury, and to them, luxury meant being part of an exclusive club. Darius visited these stores personally, meeting with managers one-on-one. In some cases, the conversations were productive, and the managers came around after hearing Darius' vision directly from him. But in other cases, the meetings ended in tense standoffs, with some managers resigning rather than compromise what they saw as the essence of the brand. One of the most difficult moments came when Philip, the head of international sales, handed in his resignation. He had been with the company for over 20 years, helping to expand its presence into some of the wealthiest markets in the world. His departure sent shockwaves through the company, but Darius knew it had been inevitable. Sitting in his office, staring at Philip's resignation letter, Darius felt a pang of regret. He hadn't wanted to lose Philip, but he also knew that the changes he was making were non-negotiable. The company couldn't afford to cling to the old ways if it was going to survive in the future. He set the letter down and leaned back in his chair, staring up the ceiling. Change was hard. He knew that. But he also knew that if they didn't push through this resistance, the company would stagnate. Months passed, and the shift in the company's culture began to take root. The retraining programs were expanded, and Darius worked closely with HR to implement new hiring practices that prioritized diversity and empathy. Slowly but surely, the customer experience started to improve. Reports from the stores were promising. Customers who had previously felt alienated were returning, and new customers, ones who had never felt like they belonged in such high-end spaces, were starting to walk through the doors. The brand's social media presence began to reflect this new inclusivity, with campaigns that featured a broader range of models and showcased the stories of diverse customers. The company wasn't out of the woods yet. There were still challenges to overcome, and not every change had been met with universal approval. But the tide was starting to turn. The brand's reputation, once teetering on the edge of irrelevance, was slowly being rebuilt on a foundation of integrity, inclusion, and quality. For Darius, the hardest part wasn't over, but for the first time in a long time, he felt hopeful. The road ahead was long, but he knew that the company was finally heading in the right direction. Melanie sighed, clearly still skeptical. I don't know, Darius. This feels risky. We're tinkering with something that's worked for a long time. If we get this wrong, Darius interrupted gently, we can always adjust. But if we don't try, we'll never know. And I guarantee you, if we stay on the path we're on, we're heading for a much bigger failure. The reports, the feedback we've been getting, it's not just a minor issue. It's systemic. We have to address it, or we're going to lose customers, lose employees, and ultimately lose relevance. The room was heavy with tension. Darius could see that he had planted seeds of doubt, but he also knew this wasn't the end of the resistance. Changing minds, especially ones that had been set in their ways for years, would take time. In the following weeks, the internal friction intensified. The retraining programs were met with skepticism from some store managers, particularly those in wealthier regions where the exclusivity of the brand had become part of the store's identity. Some managers resisted implementing the changes, arguing that their clientele didn't want or need inclusivity. They wanted luxury, and to them, luxury meant being part of an exclusive club. Darius visited these stores personally, meeting with managers one-on-one. In some cases, the conversations were productive, and the managers came around after hearing Darius' vision directly from him. But in other cases, the meetings ended in tense standoffs, with some managers resigning rather than compromise what they saw as the essence of the brand. One of the most difficult moments came when Philip, the head of international sales, handed in his resignation. He had been with the company for over 20 years, helping to expand its presence into some of the wealthiest markets in the world. His departure sent shockwaves through the company, but Darius knew it had been inevitable. Sitting in his office, staring at Philip's resignation letter, Darius felt a pang of regret. He hadn't wanted to lose Philip, but he also knew that the changes he was making were non-negotiable. The company couldn't afford to cling to the old ways if it was going to survive in the future. He set the letter down and leaned back in his chair, staring up the ceiling. Change was hard. He knew that. But he also knew that if they didn't push through this resistance, the company would stagnate. Months passed, and a shift in the company's culture began to take root. The retraining programs were expanded, and Darius worked closely with HR to implement new hiring practices that prioritized diversity and empathy. Slowly but surely, the customer experience started to improve. Reports from the stores were promising. Customers who had previously felt alienated were returning, and new customers, ones who had never felt like they belonged in such high-end spaces, were starting to walk through the doors. The brand's social media presence began to reflect this new inclusivity, with campaigns that featured a broader range of models and showcased the stories of diverse customers. The company wasn't out of the woods yet. There were still challenges to overcome, and not every change had been met with universal approval. But the tide was starting to turn. The brand's reputation, once teetering on the edge of irrelevance, was slowly being rebuilt on a foundation of integrity, inclusion, and quality. For Darius, the hardest part wasn't over, but for the first time in a long time, he felt hopeful. The road ahead was long, but he knew that the company was finally heading in the right direction. "I think we're heading in the right direction," she said, her voice measured but supportive. "But we need to keep our eye on the bottom line. The changes we've made are good for our brand, but we need to ensure they're good for business as well. We can't lose sight of profitability." Darius smiled, appreciating Lauren's pragmatism. "Agreed. That's why we'll be conducting a full audit of our operations over the next few months. We'll be looking for ways to streamline our processes to cut costs where we can without compromising on quality. But I'm confident that if we stay the course, the financials will follow." The meeting ended on a positive note, with the board seemingly more united than they had been in months. Darius left the room feeling a mixture of relief and determination. They had come a long way, but the journey was far from over. A few weeks later, Darius found himself in a familiar place, the New York flagship store. It was here just over a year ago that he had first come face to face with the toxic culture that had been festering in his company. It was here that he had realized just how far off course they had gone. But today, the store felt different. The atmosphere was lighter, the staff more attentive and engaged. As Darius walked through the aisles, he observed the interactions between the employees and the customers. There was a warmth, a genuine care that had been missing before. He approached the counter where a young sales associate was helping an older woman choose a scarf. The associate, a woman in her mid-20s, was patient and kind, taking the time to explain the different fabrics and patterns without a hint of condescension. The customer smiled, clearly pleased with the service. Darius felt a swell of pride. This was what he had been fighting for. As he continued his walk through the store, he was greeted by the store manager, a man named Michael who had been resistant to the changes at first. But over time, Michael had come around, and now he was one of the strongest advocates for the new culture. "Mr. Darius," Michael said, extending his hand with a broad smile. "Good to see you again." "Good to see you too," Darius replied, shaking his hand. "How are things going here?" Michael's smile widened. "Better than I could have imagined. The retraining programs have made a huge difference. The staff is more engaged, the customers are happier. I won't lie, I had my doubts at first. But now, I'm a believer." Darius chuckled softly. "I'm glad to hear that. It's been a long road, but it's starting to pay off." Michael nodded, his expression more serious now. "You were right, about the culture. I didn't see it at first, but now it's clear. The way we used to do things, it wasn't sustainable. We were driving people away. But now the customers, they're coming back. And they're bringing their friends." Darius felt a sense of vindication. That's what I wanted to hear. As they stood there, watching the flow of customers through the store, Darius couldn't help but feel a profound sense of accomplishment. It wasn't just about the numbers or the profits. It was about creating something meaningful, something lasting. He had taken a risk, betting the future of his company on a vision that not everyone had believed in. But now that vision was becoming a reality.